You didn't just watch Judge Boyd deliver justice. You watched millions of people emotionally accepting a verdict from a courtroom that never existed. No doc, no records, no real trials. Yet it feels real, and that is the problem we need to talk about tonight. I have spent years observing the mechanics of the American legal system, but what I'm seeing now isn't law, it's a performance designed to feel like it. Judge Boyd didn't deliver accountability, he delivered the version of it people were desperate to believe still exists. Ask yourself, why did no one ask for proof? Why did millions of viewers watch a man in a black robe shout down a defendant and immediately hit the share button? It's because in the real world, the powerful always seems to get away. We see corruption go unpunished. We see loopholes exploited by high-priced lawyers, and we see a system that feels increasingly slow and indifferent to common sense. Then Judge Boyd appears on your screen. He has the gavel, he has a robe, he has the judicial voice that resonates with an authority we no longer see in our daily lives. When he speaks, he doesn't just cite statutes, he speaks for your anger. He says the things you wish a real judge would say to the villains of society. What you heard wasn't a ruling, it was emotional relief. It was a release valve for a society that feels justice is no longer strong enough. Judge Boyd didn't exercise power, he performed it. And he performed it so perfectly that the line between fiction and reality began to dissolve for millions of Americans. This is the ultimate lesson I want to unpack. We are entering an era where our need for emotional closure is so great that we are willing to accept a staged justice over a flawed reality. But when fiction feels cleaner than reality, it means our trust in actual institutions has already collapsed. Look at his face. Notice the practiced sternness, the way he looks directly into the camera, as if he's looking directly into the soul of the nation. This isn't a judge managing a heavy caseload in a gray municipal building. This is a character designed to satisfy a psychological hunger for a perfect punishment. Tonight, we aren't just analyzing a video. We are examining how easily authority can be simulated and believed in the age of viral media. We are peeling back the curtain on the courtroom that couldn't exist, but that America needed to see. Because mistaking this performance for reality is more dangerous than the crimes it pretends to punish. It creates a fantasy where justice is simple, loud, and instantaneous. But real justice is complicated. Real accountability takes work. Are you ready to see how the illusion was built? Because once you understand the judicial voice as a tool of manipulation, you can never watch these videos the same way again. To understand the power of Judge Boyd, we first have to unmask the man behind the bench. When you search for his name in the official judicial directories of Rhode Island or any other state, you find absolutely nothing. There is no bar association record, no history of public election, and no official appointment by any government body. Judge Boyd isn't a member of the American judiciary. He is a narrative construct designed specifically for the viral age. So, who is he really? He is a performer who has mastered what I call the aesthetic of authority. Think about the visual cues you see on your screen. That heavy black robe he wears isn't a symbol of a state-granted commission. It is a costume. The gavel sitting on his desk isn't a tool to maintain order in a public institution. It is a percussion instrument used to punctuate emotional high points in a scripted drama. Every time that wood hits the desk, it sends a psychological signal to your brain that justice is being served, even when no actual law is being applied. He operates through a technique of borrowed authority by using the first-person I, as in, I am judging you, or I will not tolerate this in my courtroom. He taps into the deep-seated respect we are conditioned to have for the office of a judge. This judicial voice is weaponized to simulate truth. In a real courtroom, a judge's power comes from the law and the Constitution. But in Boyd's courtroom, the power comes entirely from the camera lens and the editing booth. Why does his performance look so convincing? It's because he acts like the judge we all wish exists. Real justice is often boring and frustratingly slow. Actual judges are constrained by strict procedural rules, evidence laws, and the constitutional rights of the defendant. They speak in dry, technical language that is difficult for the average person to follow. Judge Boyd, however, is free from those limitations. He is a judge who can be angry exactly when you are angry. He can deliver a righteous speech exactly when you feel the world has lost its moral compass. He isn't an officer of the court. He is a release valve for our collective societal frustration. We want to believe in him because reality feels too messy and the powerful often seems untouchable. He exists because there is a massive void where our faith in real institutions used to be. But once you realize the robe is just fabric and the gavel is just a prop, you have to ask a more disturbing question. If the judge isn't real, what kind of law is he actually practicing? Because the courtroom itself, the very walls and the procedures shown in these videos, holds legal impossibilities that defy every rule of the American legal system. If you want to understand the depth of this illusion, you have to look past the black robe and listen to the actual logic of the proceedings. In a real American courtroom, there are rules that even the most powerful judges cannot break. There is a docket, a public record, and a strict sequence of due process. But in the world of Judge Boyd, these foundations of law are replaced by legal impossibilities that serve only one purpose: emotional impact. I have analyzed dozens of these viral clips, and the pattern is always the same. Authority is simulated, not earned. You see a defendant brought in, a crime described, and then almost instantly, a verdict that feels satisfying but is legally absurd. For example, the way arrest and bail are handled in these videos often defies the actual statutes of the state they pretend to represent. In Boyd's world, the judge has the power to ignore procedure if the defendant is bad enough. In reality, a judge who acts with such blatant disregard for the rules of evidence and procedure would be removed from the bench by a judicial conduct commission within days. They didn't report justice, they staged it. The creators of this content understand that the average viewer doesn't know the intricacies of the law, but they do know how it should feel when a villain is finally caught. This is where the judicial voice becomes a tool of manipulation. By using legal-sounding jargon words like contempt, remand, and statutory maximum, they weaponize language to simulate truth. It creates an illusion of a system that is functioning perfectly, where a dramatic moral speech from the bench replaces the dry, technical reading of judgment guidelines. This first-person courtroom narration is extremely dangerous to our perception of reality. It teaches the audience that justice is simple, loud, and can be achieved through the sheer will of a strong personality. But real justice is complicated, often slow, and deliberately restrained. When you watch Judge Boyd, you aren't watching a legal proceeding. You are watching a script designed to provide a release valve for a society that feels real justice has become toothless. We stop looking for a docket number or a court record because the story works by punishing the right kind of villain. When a video gives us that perfect punishment, our brain's need for closure overrides our critical thinking. We don't ask why there is no defense attorney arguing for the accused or why the rules of testimony are being ignored. We just want to see the gavel fall. This courtroom couldn't exist because it operates on the power of an algorithm, not the power of the Constitution. You watch a video of Judge Boyd and you feel an immediate, visceral rush of satisfaction. That feeling is not accidental. It is the product of a finely tuned emotional script designed to trigger a specific psychological response. The narrative works so effectively because it carefully identifies what I call the right kind of villain: the arrogant driver, the disrespectful youth, or the entitled heir who believes they are untouchable. By targeting these specific pain points of a society that feels the powerful are constantly escaping accountability, the story creates an environment where emotional closure is guaranteed. This isn't just legal entertainment. It is a simulated execution of justice designed to provide the emotional relief that reality often denies us. Notice the escalation calculated in these videos. It almost always begins with a display of the defendant's arrogance or cold indifference, which serves as the necessary trigger for the audience's outrage. Once the anger is primed, the judge strikes back with what appears to be total moral clarity. He doesn't just issue a fine. He orders an immediate arrest or denies bail on the spot, often regardless of the legal context. These are legal impossibilities in many of the minor situations presented. But the viewer does not care about procedural correctness or the Bill of Rights. They care about the perfect punishment. They want to see the gavel fall and the villain led away in chains immediately. The moral speech that follows is where the performance of authority reaches its climax. In these moments, The judge uses his judicial voice not to interpret statutes or constitutional law, but to scold and degrade the defendant in front of millions. This isn't a ruling in any traditional sense. It is a verbal lashing that says exactly what people have been desperate to hear in their own lives. Justice feels real in this fictional courtroom simply because it gives voice to the collective frustration of a nation. It satisfies a deep-seated fantasy of accountability that our actual legal systems, hampered by capitalism and complexity, fail to deliver. However, we must remain analytical and look at the cost of this illusion. When fiction feels cleaner and more moral satisfying than reality, it is a stark warning that trust in our actual institutions has already collapsed. We are considering a release valve, not a legitimate courtroom. The authority being displayed is entirely simulated, borrowed from the utilized symbols of the state, the heavy robe, the wooden gavel, and the elevated bench to manipulate our perception of what is true. These creators didn't report on justice. They staged a performance specifically to capture the algorithm's hunger for outrage, closure, and viral engagement. What you just witnessed in that clip wasn't a legal proceeding. It was emotional justice. To understand why millions of people hit the share button, we have to look at the psychological release valve these videos provide. We live in a society where the prevailing sentiment is that the system is rigged, that the powerful and the wealthy always find a way to get away with their actions. When Judge Boyd stares down a defendant and delivers a crushing sentence, he isn't just speaking for the law, he is speaking for your anger. This is where the judicial voice is most effectively used as a tool of manipulation. The creators of this content understand that for many of us, real-life justice feels inadequate, slow, and often unfair. In contrast, Judge Boyd's courtroom offers a world where accountability is loud, clear, and immediate. It feels real because it says exactly what people have wanted to hear for years. He doesn't exercise power, he performs it to satisfy a specific emotional hunger for closure. The narrative works so perfectly because it always identifies and punishes the right kind of villain. Whether it's an entitled millionaire or a disrespectful agitator, the script is written to ensure the audience feels a sense of visceral satisfaction when the gavel drops. This is the outrage plus closure cycle that the YouTube algorithm feeds upon. We are drawn to these performances because they offer a version of reality that is cleaner, simpler, and more morally satisfying than the world we actually inhabit. However, there is a dangerous hidden cost to this emotional relief. When we start to prefer the feeling of being heard by a fictional judge over the complex reality of a functioning legal system, our critical thinking becomes a casualty. When fiction feels cleaner than reality, it is a sign that trust in actual institutions has already collapsed. Judge Boyd exists not because he is a real authority, but because he fills a void left by a society that has lost faith in true justice. As an observer of these legal narratives, I see a pattern. The audience doesn't want the truth. They want the feeling of being right. But we must ask ourselves, what happens to a democracy when emotional satisfaction replaces factual grounding? Tonight's lesson is that mistaking a scripted performance for judicial reality is more dangerous than the crime it pretends to punish. Why does the Judge Boyd narrative spread like wildfire across your feed? It isn't just because the drama is high. It's because these videos represent a calculated between marriage, human, psychological hunger, and digital mathematics. We are witnessing the rise of the algorithm's perfect judge, a figure who doesn't answer to a court of appeals, but to the metrics of retention, outrage, and closure. In the economy of viral media, authority is no longer earned through a law degree. It is performed for the lens. The YouTube and TikTok algorithms are designed to reward high emotional arousal. Nothing generates excitement quite like a villain getting what they deserve in real time. Real legal proceedings are often dry, technical, and involve long periods of silence or procedural debates that will cause a viewer to scroll away in seconds. Judge Boyd, however, is optimized for the platform. Every sentence is a punchline. Every gavel strike is a transition. Every moral lecture is a hook designed to keep you watching for the next 20 seconds. They didn't report justice. They staged a performance specifically to capture the algorithm's hunger for emotional release. This creates what I call the outrage plus closure cycle. Most news stories today provide the outrage a crime, a corrupt politician, a social injustice, but they rarely provide the closure. We are left feeling frustrated and powerless. Judge Boyd provides that missing piece. He identifies the right kind of villain and delivers a perfect punishment that provides immediate emotional relief. When the algorithm sees millions of people staying until the end of the video to see the verdict, it views that content as highly valuable and pushes it to millions more. But we must look at the democratic cost of this cycle. When our digital environments prioritize a release valve over factual grounding, our ability to distinguish between a verified judicial authority and a narrative construct begins to erode. This first-person courtroom narration is extremely dangerous because it trains the public to accept a simulated version of accountability when real systems feel broken. When fiction feels cleaner and more satisfying than reality, it is a warning sign that our trust in actual institutions has already collapsed. We aren't just watching a video, we are participating in a mass emotional acceptance of a courtroom that never existed. We have reached the most uncomfortable truth of the Judge Boyd phenomenon, the moment where the line between justice and fantasy completely dissolves. As an observer, I see a dangerous shift in how we consume the concept of the law. When you watch these videos, you are no longer a citizen observing a legal proceeding. You have become a consumer of a narrative specifically designed to provide emotional satisfaction without factual grounding. This isn't a byproduct of the content. It is the core engine that makes it go viral. Why is this boundary so easily crossed? It's because of the authority aesthetic. The creators understand that if you provide the visual cues of power, the heavy black robe, the wooden gavel, and the elevated bench, the human brain often stops asking for a docket number or a verified record. In this space, authority is simulated, not earned. We accept the judicial voice as truth because it echoes our own frustrations with a real-world system that feels increasingly indifferent. But we must face the democratic cost. When emotions replace truth, the very foundation of justice begins to crumble. In Boyd's courtroom, there is no complexity, no nuance, and no constitutional restraint. There is only a release valve for a society that feels the powerful always get away. We are training ourselves to value the feeling of justice over the process of justice. This isn't just entertainment. It is a psychological conditioning that makes us susceptible to anyone who can perform authority convincingly enough for a camera lens. I often tell my audience that when fiction feels cleaner than reality, it is a sign that trust has already collapsed. Real justice is messy, slow, and often leaves everyone involved feeling slightly unsatisfied. Scripted justice, however, is perfect. It punishes the right kind of villain and delivers the moral speech we've all been rehearsing in our heads. But we must ask ourselves, if we lose the ability to distinguish between a verified judicial authority and a narrative construct, what happens when a real court makes a decision we don't like? The ultimate lesson of the Judge Boyd courtroom is one of media literacy. We must learn to look past the performance and demand evidence, because a society that prefers a satisfying lie over a complicated truth is a society that has already surrendered its critical thinking to the algorithm. Are you watching for the law, or are you watching for the hit of emotional relief? Identifying that distinction is the only way to spot the next illusion before it captures your mind. We have reached the end of our deep dive into the Judge Boyd courtroom, and the ultimate lesson is one that hits closer to home than many of us care to admit. This journey wasn't really about a man in a robe or a viral video. It was about the state of our own collective psyche. The reason Judge Boyd became the voice of an imaginary justice is that we, as an audience, were ready to hear it. We are living in a moment where real-world accountability feels so distant and so rare that we are willing to accept a simulated version of it just to feel a moment of emotional relief. But we must be honest with ourselves. This wasn't a verdict. It was a release valve. The story worked so perfectly because it punishes the right kind of villain. The type of person we all feel has escaped the reach of the law in our own lives. However, when we allow ourselves to be comforted by a script, we ignore the reality that authority was simulated, not earned. Real justice is not a performance designed for high-definition cameras and viral retention rates. It is a slow, methodical, and often boring process that must respect the rights of everyone, even those we ignore. The democratic cost of mistaking this courtroom fantasy for reality is immense. When fiction feels cleaner than reality, it is a definitive sign that trust in our actual institutions has already collapsed. By consuming and sharing this content as truth, we are training ourselves to prioritize the feeling of justice over the fact of justice. If we lose the ability to distinguish between a verified judicial authority and a constructed narrative, we lose the very foundation of the American legal system. As you move forward, let this be your guide. Real accountability is not a viral hook. It doesn't happen because an algorithm wanted closure. It happens because citizens demand evidence and follow the law, even when it's complicated. Justice cannot be scripted. Next time you see the gavel fall on your screen, look past the black robe and ask for the record. Because once you realize how easily authority can be performed, you realize that the most important judge in the room is your own critical thinking. Disclaimer. This video is an opinion and educational analysis of fictional courtroom narratives and their impact on public trust in legal institutions. Judge Boyd is discussed as a narrative construct, not as a verified judicial authority. No claims are made that the events described in the analyzed stories occurred in reality. The purpose of this content is to examine how authority, justice, and accountability can be simulated through storytelling and why critical thinking is essential when consuming viral legal content.